What am I paying you guys for, by the way? I want you to accompany me as I do something that is painful, but it needs to be done. Hi there, yo folks. I'm Sean the Modern Yeoman, and I'd like to welcome you back to another Work With Me Wednesday edition of the Modern Yeoman, where there's no music, no fancy editing. It's just you and me hanging out, getting some stuff done here in the homestead. Speaking of which, we got a lot to do today, so let's get to it. Speaking of getting things done, are any of you guys experiencing a downturn in egg production lately? You're not alone, if so. It seems like for the past, 3 weeks, maybe even a month, egg production from our layers has just been really poor. We've been getting an average of 3 to 4 eggs per day. All right, guys. I hate to say it, but we actually had to buy eggs from another farm recently. What am I paying you guys for, by the way? It's a seasonal thing. I know that. When we had chickens up north, when we were in Michigan, every fall it would get to the point where they just were not pumping out their normal egg supply. It's normal, but it's kind of frustrating when you have over 20 laying hens and you're getting 3 to 5 eggs a day. But that's just part of the game. That's just how you have to play it. There are people that have 100 layers and they're able to squeeze out a decent amount of eggs in the winter, but we're not going to go that far. There's Lucky. She's getting bigger. There's also Fortuna, the luckiest meat bird. She's actually doing pretty well, holding her own. Fighter, where are you, Fighter? There he is. Fighter actually mated with her yesterday, and she was not happy about it, but I guess she's in the gang now. She's part of the laying hen crew. We're gonna see how she does. I don't think that I'm gonna harvest her with the other meat birds. Her and Lucky hang out together all the time. They're not right now, the one time that I've got the camera out. But normally they're thick as thieves and they hang out together. And she seems to be thriving, and I think it's kind of a cool experiment to see if she starts making eggs for us. Hey, meatballs. As for the meat chickens, the tentative date for processing them isn't this coming weekend, but the following weekend. So I'm a little bit nervous about doing it. It's the first time we've done it here on the Yosted. I'm hoping that my experience doing it on other farms, on other homesteads, will kick in, though, once we actually start the processing process. Next up on the agenda, it's time to start buttoning up the garden for the season. Well, we're still gonna run these 2 beds as greens beds and cover them up at night with this Agribon, this cover cloth. And I'm still gonna let this cursed bed run without the cover cloth just to see what happens. I don't know what's going on with that one. The rest of the garden, the potato bed, and these 3 pepper beds and tomato beds, I'd like to cover up with mulch. In this case, we're using hay, old hay. You got to be careful with hay because a lot of hays out there are treated with a certain type of herbicide and or pesticide that will kill your garden if you lay them down in your garden. We're lucky in that this stuff, we know for a fact it does not do that. We put this on our garden last year, about the time the garden started taking off and doing really well. So this is an older hay. It's been laying up in the hayloft since we moved here. Who knows how old it is? It was probably used for animals at one point years ago, but it's inert now. We use it for bedding for the chickens and as mulch, a cover for these beds. One of the things that we'd also like to do is cover up the beds with cardboard. My friend Billy of Perm Pastures Farm showed us this trick of covering up the beds with cardboard. Sheet mulching is what it's called, and it promotes a very active, healthy environment underneath the cardboard, a thin layer of cardboard. We don't have cardboard right now, so we're gonna go ahead and mulch with the hay, the same hay that we used earlier in the year when the garden started doing really well. I'd also like to point out the buckwheat beds here. Now, we actually are just going to keep these buckwheat beds as is. You guys might remember a few weeks ago, a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, we started planting buckwheat in some of our beds to serve as a cover crop. And the idea was for this stuff to die during the winter. And we've already had our first frost, and so it's done that. It very quickly wilted over and turned brown. And so we're just going to keep this here. This is going to serve as our cover on these beds. There's 6 beds total that have buckwheat in them. And we are just going to let them sit. We're going to let this kind of compost into these beds. So these beds I don't need to worry about. I'm just going to keep them as is. Cleaning out the garden like this is kind of symbolic to me of putting the year 2021 to bed. And in a way, I'm almost glad for it. Off camera, it was a tough year for us. We experienced loss. We've experienced some twists and turns that we didn't account for, some situations that we weren't prepared for, honestly, and it's kind of nice to be looking at all that stuff in our rearview mirror. And I'm very optimistic and upbeat about the year ahead. There's a lot of exciting things that we've got planned, a lot of cool notions that we have for the homestead in our lives. I'm really pumped to get into those things. But, you know, looking back, as I sit here at the end of this year, looking back and seeing all the kind of rough stuff that we went through, I'm reminded of what Holly and I refer to as the lemonade principle. It's a concept we came up with. It kind of goes like this. Imagine you're sitting in a air-conditioned house in the middle of the summer, and you go into the kitchen and you pour yourself a tall, cold glass of lemonade and you take a sip. And you've been inside all day, you haven't really exerted yourself. And that lemonade tastes okay, it's all right. You put it back in the fridge and then you go back to whatever you were doing in your nice air-conditioned house. Now compare that with another scenario where you're working outside, you're busting your butt in the sun. It's a really hot day, you're mowing the lawn, you're clearing brush, you're breaking a sweat, and you're building up an extreme thirst. And you go inside the house and you pour the exact same glass of lemonade and you take a sip of it. That's the best lemonade you've ever had. That lemonade is exquisite. It's an epiphany. You are so thankful for that lemonade and how sweet it is and how it's quenching your thirst. It's kind of how I look at some of the successes that we've achieved and that we're looking forward to after experiencing some setbacks, after experiencing some failures and some losses. When we achieve the opposite of those things, when we get things that we're thankful for, it makes them that much sweeter. I don't know if I'm explaining it really well, but in a nutshell, I'm very thankful. I'm extra thankful for the things that we do have and that we've been blessed with, and extra thankful for the opportunities that we'll have in the coming year, especially after dealing with some really tough things, like I said, off camera this past year. It makes these things to be thankful for in the coming year all that much sweeter. Well, looks like these beds are about ready for the winter. Finally, before I let you go, I want you to accompany me as I do something that is painful, but it needs to be done. And that's checking the propane. A few quick things to note. Propane is more expensive than it's ever been, as far as I know. $3.19 a gallon. Now, our tank here is 500 gallons, so you do the math when it comes to filling this thing up. We got this filled up 1 week ago, but it wasn't empty. It was at, I want to say, 60 or 70%. It wasn't as much as we'd normally be paying for propane. It was a fraction of what we'd normally be paying for propane. But what I need to do now is check to see how quickly our propane is going. It's been fairly cold lately, and we've had the thermostat at 66 or 67. It's kicked on quite a bit. At night we turn it down even lower. I want to see how quickly our propane is going, because that will determine how much we need to pay over this winter. So again, we filled this up a week ago. Let's see how fast it's draining. Now, real quick, they can only fill it up to 80%. So I want to see how far back from 80% it's gone in a week's time. I'm almost scared to do it, but I got to. Let's see it. Okay, so it's been a week and we went from 80% to 75%. That's not bad. So we're looking at about a 5% usage of the tank per week. I think that's reasonable. Now again, I'm not gonna tell you how much it costs to fill this thing up. You can do the math. $3.19, $3.20 a gallon, 500 gallon tank. They can only fill it up to 80%, but it's not cheap. So this rate of use, 5% a week, I could probably do a little bit better, but that seems okay for now. We really need to get our wood stove fixed, looked at and fixed, but that's a conversation for another time. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and until we see you again on Sunday, remember, as always, slowly.